Today, I will be showing you how to make the Iron Man heads-up display effect in DaVinci Resolve Fusion. In the last video, we covered building the heads-up display elements using Fusion Shape System, so check that video out if you haven't already. If you want to save some time, I have a pack of 50 pre-built elements for just $5, linked down below. That is what I will be using in this video, so it is super easy to follow along. The main way to build this effect is using the camera tracker in the studio version of DaVinci Resolve, but I will be showing you how to get close using the free version. It's actually a pretty cool trick, taking advantage of a fundamental Fusion system. Alright, let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is capture the footage. So you're going to want to film yourself on a black backdrop. Then you're going to want to position your camera at eye level or higher, with your face taking up most of the screen. Then I had a softbox right behind the camera pointed down with two lights on the side that would cast a blue light on my face. Now having that blue light actually be cast on your face will really help sell the effect in the end, but be careful not to make these too bright because we're still going to add more in Fusion. When that's all set up, record yourself looking around, being careful to stay in the middle of the screen. If you're doing this for a film, it's a really good idea to plan out what graphics you want to have before you start. That way you or your actor know where to look and why to look there. Once you have your footage, get that imported into DaVinci Resolve and it's time to get started. To get the most accurate results, let's set up some basic color management. I filmed this using a FX3 and Sony's S-Log3. So right after my media in, I'm going to do shift space and add in a Cineon log node. From this, we want to make sure the mode is set to log to linear. Then we're going to come down to log type and set this to be Sony S-Log. Finally, it has an option for the version that we're using, so I'm going to select S-Log3. And now our video is in linear, and linear is just a really wide open color space that Fusion works really well with. But obviously, we do not want our final result to be in linear, so what I'm going to do is copy this node, then I'm going to paste it, move it all the way to the end here, and then set this to be linear to log. So this is going to take it from linear and put it back into Sony's S-Log3. That means when I view the media out and the media in, there's going to be no difference between the two images. To stay organized, I'm going to click on the first node, press F2 and do CS in for color space in, and then do the same thing at the end doing CS out. When we're inside of the linear color space, it doesn't quite look right. So go up to the top, press this View LUT button, and then come down to Gamut View LUT. Then we're going to come back and press the Edit button. We want to set the source space to be Sony's S-Gamut 3. Then for the output space, we're going to select Rec 709 Scene. When we close that, this is going to give us a good preview as to what our final effect will look like. And let's quickly jump over to the color page and set this up the same way. I'm going to add in a second node and rename this one Color Space. Then I'm going to add in a Color Space Transform, come up to the settings and set this to be Sony's. And now between the Fusion page and color page, it's going to look very similar so we can work a lot easier. Now that we have that set up, let's get started with tracking. And the first thing that we want to do is add a mask around my face because we want to have a nice shadow fall off and you don't want to be able to see my shoulders and stuff like that in the shot. Instead of manually animating a mask to follow the motion of my face, let's use a tracker node right after the color space. I'm going to be using the new IntelliTrackers, which are just in the studio version, but if you have the free version, the normal trackers are going to work totally fine. And to get a good track, I want to have 3 points. So I'm going to add these on both of my eyebrows, and then I'm also going to add one down on my chin. To get a better result, I'm going to set the adaptive mode to be best match, and then press the track in both directions. Alright, once that's done, you can play through to see if you have a good track. Mine is totally good here. And actually draw the mask, we're going to be using the B-spline node. The reason we're using this one is because it automatically smooths out the curves for us and gives us a really good looking mask. We're going to start with a shape like this, and now we actually want to attach this to the tracker. To do this, we're just going to plug this into the green input on the tracker itself. Then in the tracker node, come to Operation and set this to be Match Move. That's going to show us the mask overlaid on top of our image. To get this to actually work as a mask, we can come to the operator mode and set this to be mask just like we could on a merge node. Now, as you can see, the mask isn't quite in the right spots. Let's select all these points and shift it over and then add a nice soft edge to get the effect we're looking for. And to make it easier to see and that we don't have this transparent grid, let's add in a background node and merge this up after the tracker, hitting Ctrl T to flip those inputs around. And now you can see what this will look like in our final effect. Alright, and you can see that is looking really good. Inside of the B-spline node, we can play around more with the soft edge, as well as using the border width if we need to trim it in or extend it out a little bit, depending on the shape of our mask. But something like this is going to look really good. But we're actually going to come in here, remove the soft edge, and add a bunch of border width because we need to get our 3D camera track, and we don't want to be removing information for that. So after this merge node, let's add in a camera tracker and go up to the inspector to get started. So this has this really nice preview auto track locations, and when it does that, you can see some green dots that are drawn on the image. We'll want to bring the minimum feature separation down so that way it tries to pull in some more points, but even now it's only getting about 4 on the screen. We're going to need some more information than that for our track, so we're going to use a trick to add in some detail. The way I like to do this is using a unsharp mask, and it is not the most flattering result, but it does work. When you add that in, we'll want to crank up the size as well as the gain, and you can see this makes every feature on your face really pronounced. Like I said, not that flattering. But going back to the camera tracker, if we move this around, you can see it's going to add in a few more points. If it's not showing a ton yet, that's totally fine. We're going to come in here, select bidirectional tracking, which is going to go forwards, and then it's going to go back to check all the tracks again, and then we'll press the auto track button. And while you wait for this to track, go get yourself some coffee. Once the track is done, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that unsharp mask because that looks awful. But now we need to tell Fusion to actually solve this track. And this is the process where Fusion looks at all these points and then calculates the movement of the camera based on where these points are in relation to each other. It's a lot of math that you don't have to do because the camera tracker does it for you. So go to the Solve tab and press Solve. This might take a little while, so again, go get yourself another cup of coffee. Alright, and once that's done, the points are going to change a bunch of different colors, and that's just to indicate the quality of a track Fusion thinks it has. The main thing to pay attention to is this average solve error, and you can see this is at 0.85 pixels right now. That's actually a pretty good track. If you're working in 4K, which I am, you want to make sure that's under 1 pixel. If you're working in 1080, you want to make sure that's under around 0.4, 0.5 pixels. So a way that we can improve this is by deleting the bad tracks. Using the maximum solve error, we can drag this down and you can see it's going to select all those red and orange points. Then we'll come down here and hit delete, and it's just going to get rid of all of those. Then to get this updated, we have to solve this again. At this point, you should probably lay off the coffee. Too much caffeine is bad for you, but if you want, go get some more coffee. All right, and now we're looking at an average solve error of 0.3, which for 4K, this is phenomenal. So we're not really going to run into any issues with our track. Sometimes when you do this, you'll get a pop-up saying there's not enough points left to solve. To fix that, you'll just have to undo it and then add a few more points back in and try it again. All right, now we need to make sure that all of this is aligned properly. So switch over to the Export tab and come down to the 3D Scene Transform options. We're going to set this to be unaligned and then select a few of these points. So I want to avoid areas that like reach out. So I don't want to select any of the points on my nose or like in my eyes where it goes in. So I want to select the stuff on my cheeks, on the forehead, and then down here on my chin. Now we want to press these set from selection buttons. So Fusion's going to look at those. It's going to say, okay, those are relatively in the same plane. So it's going to align everything based on those. For the rotation, if you have any values that are greater than 45, what we want to do is subtract or add 90 to it. So in this case, since it's -80, I'm going to add 90, and that's going to bring it to be 10 degrees. That's not going to mess anything up. That's just going to make it a little bit easier to work in the 3D system. All right, now what we have to do is set this back to be aligned, and then we can press this export button, and it's going to create our 3D scene with our camera and everything we need. If I view the 3D render node at the end, you can see there is a ground plane that is now going to follow the motion of my face. Let's come back up to the B-spline and up the softness, and then bring down the border width as well. Then we're going to click on the ground plane node and do Control P to put the node in pass-through mode. Now sometimes you'll have some weird artifacts down here at the bottom in our preview, and that's because in the render node, you can see the maximum texture depth is set to integer 8. We want to set this back to be float 32, so that way we don't lose any detail. Okay, let's view the merge node off to the side, and you can see all of the tracking points are shown in 3D space because of this point cloud here. The really nice thing about this is we can use it to align all of our objects. We don't have to guess where they have to be for the motion to line up correctly. This also has our image going into the camera node, so that way we can see it in our renderer, but we're actually just going to disconnect that. Instead of doing it that way, we can merge our camera over our media. So now if I view this merge node and say turn on the ground plane, you can see we're getting exactly the same thing. Let's go ahead and make sure our node graph is organized. So what I'm going to do is drag our 3D scene up here because we want plenty of room to work with this. And then I'm going to move all of this away from the merge node. So that way it's just a little bit easier to see what's going on. We're then going to put all of our graphics up top here and then keep our compositing effects down below. So now we begin the fun part, adding in all of the elements, and I'm going to be using those pre-made ones for my HUD pack, but you can use your own as well. For the best performance, I would recommend working with a pre-rendered version of your element so Fusion doesn't have to draw a ton of shapes. If you built an element in Fusion that has transparency start on the deliver page, make sure the format is set to be QuickTime and then the codec to be DNxHR, and now down at the bottom we have this export alpha option. This will make it so you can put the chart above anything and it keeps that transparency, which we're going to need for the effect. Up in the media pool, I have my HUD pack added in, and it has all of these charts, circles, frames, and the other category. In each one of these, there's an animated and static. So the static is just a plain PNG image, and the animated has some sort of animation on each one of these elements. So let's start with a circle and come down to the animated section. And then I'm going to pick one of these to use. So I'm going to grab circle 19. Now right away we can see what this looks like inside of Fusion, but we can't connect this into the merge node because this is not a 3D object. To bring a image or video into the scene, we want to use a image plane node. We can now connect this into the merge node, and if I view the merge node and you can see it appeared in our render, we have our graphic. So this element we're going to have move all around and follow the direction of our eye as I look around. Just to make stuff a little bit simpler to change later, what I'm going to do is add in a transform node, transform 3D node after this image plane. Then with this one, I will move the Z position out to get about the distance away from my face that I want. Now what we're going to do is animate everything inside of the image plane node. So starting at the beginning, I'm going to move this around and try and line it up with the direction my eye is looking. Inside of the viewer, you can come up to the top left and switch this to be the rotation control, so that way you can add rotation onto this shape. So we're going to start it right there and come over into the inspector, right click, and then do animate translate group. That's going to add a keyframe on all of them right away, and we'll do the same thing with the rotation. Then what I'll do is I'll just move forward until I see the eye snap to a new location. And as you can see, it's only going to keep this beginning location for like a single frame. So we're actually not even going to animate that one because we're going to have the element zoom in from the outside. So it doesn't matter where it is on the first frame. So let's start about like 10 frames in. We're going to add a new keyframe here. Let's move this over and position it and then update all of our rotation values as well. Going back to the beginning, I'm going to delete all of these keyframes. So once you're happy with the animation, we're going to animate the on and off points. We're going to have this first animation go on pretty quick. So let's say at frame 451, let's go in and set a key on both of these groups. Then all the way at the beginning, I want to take this HUD effect and move it so it is right in front of our camera. This way it's going to scale down right in position. Now to smooth out all the movements throughout the entire clip, let's open up the spline editor and then click our image plane 3D. Come over to the right and do show only selected tool. Now we can select this tool and you see the mess of keyframes that we've created. So let's select all of these and press F on our keyboard to flatten them out. This is going to smooth all of them out so it has a much more natural and realistic movement. Now is also when you can go through here and look for some unrealistic movement or keyframes that don't just quite work and delete them or modify them. Alright, but anyways, at the end here, what we're going to do is have this thing flicker off. So coming to the material tab, let's grab the opacity and we're going to animate this. So add in a keyframe, go to the next frame, you're just using the arrow key on your keyboard. We're going to bring the opacity down. And then on the next frame, we'll bring that back up. Maybe on this one, we'll leave it at 1. And then on the next one, bring it back down and just create a nice flicker animation for this to leave our view. And this is what we're getting now, just a nice digital glitch off. Something else that can be fun to do is add in another circle element to the one that we're already animating. This could be like it's focusing in on something or you have a targeting computer that's locking onto an object. Let's start up in the media pool finding a new circle element to use. When we drag this down, we're again going to need a new image plane node, and we can plug this right into the first image plane node. What that's going to do is make it so this element is going to follow all the movement of the first one. So then in the transform tab, let's just grab that Z rotation and move it out so it has a bit of an offset, and then maybe scale it down as well. Now let's say we want it to start appearing right here. We're going to do the same thing with the opacity, but start it at 0 this time. So we're going to have that flicker on so you can see both of them and you get a really nice parallax effect. And then instead of doing the same thing for animating it off, we can just come to the keyframes tab, again do the show only selected tools, and we're just going to copy all of these keyframes, click in here, do Control V to paste them, and then press V to invert them. So that way we have the flicker animation off at the end as well, and we don't have to go through and manually do it with keyframes. Alright, so we got the first element in, and that was actually the hardest one, so from here on out it gets a lot simpler. I'm going to shift all of this off to the side just so we can stay really organized. Now we can start building out all of the other graphics, and the first thing that I want to do before I get too far into that is come down here and make sure all of our framing is correct. So I'm going to add in a background node and connect this up over the top. Then I'm going to add in a rectangle, connect this into the background, and set this to be inverted. I can set the width to be 1, and then I'm going to bring the height up so I can add in a fake letterbox effect. Then right before this, I'm going to add in another transform node, and I want to zoom this in so that way my face does take up all of the screen. And now this is going to make lining up all of the other elements a lot easier to do. So up in the media pool, let's come down to frames. We're going to grab the animated ones, and I want to look for this first one right here. Again, I need to throw this into an image plane so that way we can connect it up into our merge node. And I'm going to pull this out and keep it a good distance away from my face so that way it has some nice parallax. Under the transform, I want to crank up this size so it is nice and big, and then we can just frame this up exactly how we want it. Now, if there's too much parallax and it's going off the screen too much, that's when you want to bring it closer to the face, and then we'll have to scale it up or scale it down depending on how you want to frame it. Now, to make this look even better in 3D, what we want to do is add in the Bender 3D node. If you set the axis to be the z-axis and then use the amount, you can see this is going to curve it in around my face. So this gives a really cool look of like a helmet effect, and it just makes everything a little bit more visible and look even more 3D. Once you get that looking good, let's again set this off to the side. Under the animated charts, there's a bunch of these charts that we can throw around the screen to maybe show different parts of the suit working. I'm going to drag in chart 2, add this into an image plane, and connect this into the merge node. And once we get this one positioned in the view, we're going to add in another bender node. Again, setting this to be Z, we can change the amount that it's bent. And then if you want, you can also play around with the center to change where it's actually being bent from, like the pivot point essentially. So this gives it a really cool effect, especially when you turn your head because it starts bending over and you can see the other side of it. Then I'm just going to keep duplicating that process until I get all of the elements in that I want. Alright, so this is coming out really good so far, and I also rendered out a custom element. I took one of the frames from the pack and then filled it with a logo, text, and all of that stuff, and I want to add this in as well. And I can just use the exact same thing, adding in the image plane. But what I want to do is add this in the center of the screen. So when the crosshairs and the circles disappear, I want this to animate on right in the middle. So that happens about right here. So let's connect the image plane up. And with this one, you'll notice that I did not render transparency. And I wanted to do that just so I could show you an example of how we could remove it. After the media in node, if you add in a luma keyer, it will remove the black background. Alright, but in this case, we should not be able to read Fusion there because it should be flipped around. So let's go to the Y, do 180, and so that way it's all correct. And now this already has an animation built into it. So to get this to appear right away, instead of it starting at frame 440, we want this to start at frame 589, right around there. So in the inspector, let's just drag this back until we get the first frame to be about 585. There we go, that works. So now when we go through this, it'll animate on right in the middle of the screen. So just like that, really cool. All right, so we'll leave this up here for a second. Let's actually make this a little bit bigger. And then what we'll do is have it animate down to the side. So I'll add in a keyframe on the rotation as well as the offset. And then we'll scale that down and move it down into the corner here. And then in the spline editor, make sure we smooth out all of those keyframes by pressing F. Awesome, and I think this could benefit from using a bender node as well. So let's add that in with the Z offset and add a little bit of that. All right, so now we have a pretty cool looking graphic, and the next step is going to be to adding in all of the glow and color effects. But before we do that, I do want to cover that free version method as well. Even if you had the studio version, I'd recommend checking this out because this is a really cool thing that you can use and might apply to some of your other projects. All right, so we're going to be going back a couple steps to do the free version one. So this is after we already got our track because we're going to be using this tracker to apply all the motion. So let's add in the frame, and we're going to be working with this piece of media and overlaying this on our footage. To understand how this works, we need to talk about Fusion's coordinate system. Anytime you're working with something like a transform node, instead of working with pixels like 0 to 1920, it works from 0 to 1. This means that if I have something like an ellipse, if I put in 0, it is always going to be the left side of the screen. And if I put in 1, it's always going to be the right side of the screen. That's because Fusion automatically will multiply 1 by 3820 in the case of 4K to make sure it is in the right spot. This makes working between resolutions really easy because Fusion's automatically able to scale it up and scale it down depending on your project settings. But what happens when we have two pieces of media that are different resolutions? So for example, our HUD graphic is 1920 by 1080, but our video is in 4K. Well, if I use the controls in the merge node, it works as expected. So if I set the center to be 0, it moves it all the way to the side. But that's because this merge node is working in 4K. If I add a transform node after this media in and set this to be 0, you can see it is not actually moving it all the way to the side of the screen. And that's because from this transform node's perspective, it's moving it all the way to the side, but it's in a lower resolution. So by exploiting this, we can actually add in some parallax to our track. So with this transform node, let's right click on the center and do connect to tracker 1 and do unsteady position. We'll do the same thing with the size, connect to tracker 1 unsteady size, and finally the same thing with the angle. So since this is in a lower resolution than our image, it's actually going to have less movement than it should. So the way to fix this is after this media in, adding in a scale node. And using this, we can set the size to be 2. So that way it brings it up to 1920 by 1080. And now this is going to apply the track correctly and match the movement as expected. But what if we come in the scale and set this to be something like 3 or 4? Well, if I do that, it's going to get really big and we can't see the graphic anymore. So we'll need to add in another transform right after it and then scale the size down. But once that's done and I hit play, you can see there's a nice parallax effect. And the whole reason that this is happening is because our track was done in 4K and now the track is being applied to an 8K image. So all of the movement is exaggerated by 2 times. So you can mess around with this a lot. You can make a 16K layer. You can do stuff like that. Typically what I do is I make a far, a middle, and then a close like depth. And then inside each of those transforms, I'll add in the elements I want in that layer of depth. So it's a pretty cool way to do this inside of the free version. It does take a little more time and you're not going to get as good of a result. So if possible, use the camera tracker. All right, now back in the main composition, we're going to start working on styling. And styling is going to be the same between the free and studio version, because either way, you're just going to be working with a version of it that's just white with the transparent pixels behind it. All right, the first thing I want to start with is a lens distortion. And instead of distorting in like the effect does by default, I want to pull this up so it's a positive value and distorts out. It just kind of unwraps it and gives a really cool look. This is totally optional. This is a stylistic choice at this point, but I think it looks nice. Then after that, we're going to get into the good stuff by adding in a glow node. I'm going to come up here and make sure I turn off the alpha value. And then I'm also going to bring the glow size down, but keep the glow strength up pretty high. We're going to do a progressive glow, adding in a couple nodes so that way we get a really nice looking fall off. But before we add the next ones, I'm also going to add in the scan lines effect. And this will add in some TV scan lines across the screen, but if we crank this line frequency all the way up, you can see it gives a nice like pixelated digital look. You can play around with the settings like the sharpness, the angle, offset it and stuff like that, but we're going to pretty much leave it at the default just with a high line frequency. Now to blend all that in a little bit better, we'll add in our second glow, and this one is going to have a higher glow size and a lower glow amount. Again, we want to make sure we turn off that alpha. And then finally, we'll add in one more, and this one's going to have a really big glow size, but a low glow amount just to give a really nice looking fall off. To actually add color to this, we're going to add in a color corrector node, and then we can come in here and just add a nice blue tint. Now, sometimes this isn't as bright as you want it, so what you can do is take the output of this lens distort and merge it up over top of it. As I show you a before and after, overlaying just that white version of the image really makes this whole thing pop. To make this a bit more organized, I'm going to alt-click on this node pipe, and it's going to add in a pipe router. Another node that I like to add for stuff like this is the prism blur node, and this is going to add in some nice chromatic aberration, but we do need to dial this back. So I'm going to bring the blur strength all the way down, and then using the strength and distance, I can customize how much this actually affects our image. So we're going to add just a very little bit of distance and then bring the strength up so it's really intense around the edges. All right, but now there's some other things that we need to add in to really sell this effect. And the first one is going to be some light reflections. If you have all this stuff in front of you, it's going to be casting light onto your face. And we addressed that in the filming spot. We added some blue cast light, but now that we have all these effects, it doesn't quite look right. And since we have motion and elements appearing and disappearing, we want that to reflect in the reflections on the face as well. So the way we're going to do that is using a bitmap node. Then taking the prism blur output, we're going to plug that in there and view this off to the side. Grabbing the high value, we can drag this down just to make stuff more intense, and then we also want to add a soft edge to just blur this image. Then after that, we're going to add in another bitmap node, making sure it's going into the yellow input, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring this high value down so that way it brightens all of this up. And again, we can add some more softness to just spread this out and give a really even look. Then after the camera tracker, let's add in a color corrector and use this bitmap as a mask on that node. Now what we can do is go in here and add a blue tint, and you can see it's going to cover the face in a blue tint, and you can even change stuff like the gain. And once that's done, I do like to just come to the beginning, add in another color corrector, and add just a slight amount of blue tint, just to fill in those areas that didn't quite get caught. Another really cool way to sell this is adding in some slight reflections to the eyes. All right, let's just view this color corrector so that way this is not as intensive on our computer. But what we want to do is go through and track our eyes. I'm going to come back to the spot that I'm pretty much looking at the camera and add in another tracker node. With this one, I'm going to zoom in and place it right on the eyes so that way we can track the motion of her face right at the same plane that our eyes are at. So that way we can apply a mask and hopefully get a really good result. So let's add in two of those just in case we need a second one. Set the adaptive mode to be best match and do track forward and reverse. And of course, while you wait for it to track, go get some coffee. All right, and once we have the track, we're again going to use the B-spline nodes, zoom in here, and then just do an outline around the eye. Now, this does not have to be perfect. It's just going to be a subtle effect. So we're just going to get it close, and then we're going to do the same thing for the other eye. Then we're going to add in a transform node after these B-splines, and then we can just merge this up so we can see what is going on. And then we're going to connect this to the tracker. So we'll come to the center X and connect this to tracker 2, and we'll do the first one that we did. And of course, we're going to have to come in here and reposition this up. And then if you add a soft edge and just scrub through, it should do a really good job of just keeping it right about in that general area. Again, this does not need to be perfect. You can also use the border width to shrink it down a little bit more so that way it's all contained within the eye. Then we're going to do the same thing for the other one. Now, the issue with our setup here is it's not going to take into account blinking. So again, if you need something perfect, just go through and manually trace out the eyes. All right, but into another transform node, we're going to take the output of this prism blur and then drag this down and connect this up into a new merge node. We'll be able to see all of the effects, and what we want to do is scale this down and then use the pivot so we can position it inside of the eye. Then connect the center to be at the position, and looks like we'll have to reposition this here. All right, and once you get all of that down there, take the output of the mask for that eye and plug this into the merge node. So that way it is only going to be visible in this area. And as we play through here, you can see it's going to do a pretty good job of keeping it in that spot. Right before the transform node, we want to add in a blur to soften this effect even more. And now from a distance, this looks really good. Let's make some more room. Our node graph is getting a bit messy here, and we're going to move these masks down below just like so. And we'll do the same thing again, adding in another transform node and merging this up, connecting this to the second tracker, and then scaling it way down and making sure it is within the eye. Now when we view it with all the effects, this looks really cool, and sometimes it's a little too intense and jumps out too much, so that's when you want to come into these merge nodes and play with this blend. So in this case, I'm going to bring both of these down to be about 0.5. All right, and as a final effect, I'm going to come right after the transform and add in some grain, and then bring this power down so it's not quite as intense. Then on the color page, I'm going to touch this up a little bit and then render it out. All right, and as you can see, this is a really cool effect, and we got a pretty good result in the end. If you guys want to support the channel so I can keep making videos like this, buy that HUD pack down below. It's just $5 and it really helps support me so I can continue doing this. If you guys have any questions about the tutorial or effect, just let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.